it gives people curiosity back, because it's just like, as our purchasing power is increasing as opposed to declining, as life is getting easier, we can be more curious. And if we're more curious, that's when we start taking on more responsibility. We start taking on more accountability. I look at Bitcoin as like the ultimate spiritual tool, where it just gives us more capacity to show up more authentically and question like who we are and how we want to show up, and what is this thing called life, and kind of asking these bigger questions. And so I think the world is a healthier place when people take on more accountability, more autonomy, and to be able to kind of choose their path intentionally, as opposed to kind of having their path chosen for them because life is hard. What money can I be confident that if I was to store this value, that I can still buy the same amount or ideally more into the future? And the answer is Bitcoin. Irony of Bitcoin being money is that it gets us to stop thinking about money.
Hi, Seb. How are you doing? Everything fine on your end?
Oh man, everything's great. Yeah, it's super nice to see you again. We were just chatting beforehand where there's the time distortion of Bitcoin. Sometimes you feel like, oh my God, it's been ages since we last chatted. And then you're like, wait, nope, it's been 5 months. It feels like 10 years in Bitcoin.
It is like that. It is also like there's a lot of weird things happening. It's one thing is happening that there is, in a short amount of time, there's a lot of news and a lot of things happening within Bitcoin that you think like, oh, this has all been just 1 year. Like it's been, I think, is it not just like about a year since Trump was elected, and then like seeing everything happen that afterwards and all of that? I'm not sure about the exact timing, but it's something like a year now. And then at the same time, we have this weird impatience that the price isn't going up enough, and like it feels like the bear market, even though we are up the last year and stuff like that.
Absolutely, yeah. And I just find it really fascinating how, like, we do in society see time as this linear thing, but time is very malleable, and it very much is in the eye of the beholder, depending on like whether or not you've got a slammed life and you're doing a lot day to day, or whether or not you're just kind of sitting at home and watching the price. Time can kind of traverse very differently. And I also find what's really interesting is that day to day, time can feel like it's going very quick. Like I feel like weeks just disappear as I'm getting older. But then I look back and I think, wait, it's only been 5 months since we chatted, and it's like my brain can't comprehend this weird speed up on the like intraday time frame and slow down on the longer term time frame.
It's an interesting intersection, time. I mean, time is such because it's so essential to Bitcoin, in my opinion. Like time and Bitcoin is on a philosophical level so interconnected. I mean, we call it the time chain for a reason, I guess.
It's, I recently did a podcast on longevity with Preston Pish. We've been kind of doing this little book review series. And in this book review series, like we're kind of just discussing like technology, what's at the forefront of technology, with obviously one of these subjects being longevity. And I'm kind of torn between this longevity space, because I feel as if from Bitcoin, value is a result of having scarcity. And I think that if we have a lifespan that's 80 years, we only have a finite amount of time, which means that we are a lot more passionate about the things we do, given the scarcity of those things. Whereas I think if we were to live to 150, 200, 500 years old, like 500 years old, you could have 50 careers back to back in every single industry. And so it's almost like it takes away from the intrigue and the curiosity and the uniqueness of life. And so I find time is really, really fascinating. And I don't know if I'm for the longevity space in terms of just like extending life. I tend to be like, you know what? I think it's the scarcity of life that makes life valuable. It makes you have to choose what it is that is meaningful to you and which avenues you want to go down. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
There's two thoughts. First of all, like I 100% agree that I think it's a great thing that old generations are dying and new generations are coming up and bringing new light into things. But the more interesting question for me is, will we get to a state where longevity is just like a matter of money and a matter of what resources you have and what access to medications you have and what access to like robot things you have. And then it's like, okay, it's almost like a game. If you want to live 1,000 years, you actually can. And this is interesting because I don't think we have a choice. If we are able to extend the life of a human being from 100 years to 1,000 years and maybe to unlimited years, I think we will. I think there's not the question of do we want it or not? Because once we're able to, it's kind of hard to put it back in the box and saying like, oh, like we don't know about that technology. We don't know about that thing. And so, I mean, if for example, if you're going in a car crash and we have such great technology that we can rebuild you, even though like your legs got lost and your half head got burned and all of that, but we know you're in memory because you uploaded it somewhere and we can rebuild it, all of that. It's like, how much is it truly you, first of all? And then also, if we have that technology and it's really good, I don't think we can choose if we want to adopt the technology or not. It's almost like Bitcoin. I think in a certain way, if I look at a lot of Bitcoin haters now, I'm like, yeah, you will have to adopt Bitcoin in some way, shape or form at some point, because you just will be so far behind if you restrict yourself from this technology. And so do you want to die, or you want to like take that technology route and live like another 200 years? I don't think we have a choice in there.
I think that's a really good point. And as you're saying that, what comes to mind is there's a book, I don't know if you've ever read it, called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And so like this is like during World War II. If I remember correctly, he was like a psychologist or passionate about psychology. And he kind of just discusses the human mind when it comes under like severe trauma, like experiencing war, experiencing camps. And one of the stories he gives in the book is this guy who'd been in one of these camps for a few years, and he was emaciated. He had like almost no life left in him, but he kept persevering. And you ask him why, and it was like, well, because I'm going to see my wife, I'm going to see my kids again. And he just keeps going. And then he finds out one day that his wife has passed on and he's not going to see his wife and kids again. And the next day he dies. And so you wonder like how much of our longevity is a result of the physical form, like our cells, our lungs, our organs, and how much of it is more of a spiritual form, as in it's like the soul feeling like I have a job, I have a duty to be there for my family, I have a duty to create value in this world. And it's when you lose that meaning in life, that is when life ends. And that's where sometimes I feel like in the scientific realm, we can get caught up on a cellular atomic level and not necessarily on more of the spiritual level.
I have, I don't know if it's a sad story from my personal life, but from my dad's side, the granddad and my grandma, they're both now dead. And it was really interesting for me to observe their last years from my perspective, because my granddad, my grandma made a lot of things happening for my granddad. She cooked for him and all of that. And when he was around, she was extremely fit. She was extremely energetic, and she was always walking around. She was always doing things. On the day he died, and they died in a high age, you could almost see within like 1-2 years how everything got worse. Like medically speaking, like everything got worse. And I think about 2 years later, she died also. So it was not like just like in the next year. It took a while, but you could literally see how she no longer had someone to bring food toward, to clean after, and all of those things. And then she got her medical things got worse. And then the thing happened where other people all of a sudden took care of her instead of she taking care of someone else. And I think there is some spiritual thing where you get motivation, and you get a means to living. You're like, I want to live for that, and I take care of someone else, and it really motivates you. And I think that's why also, I mean, in general, if you want to achieve high things, make it not about yourself, make it about more people, make it about something bigger, because then your motivation is bigger than yourself. if it's only about yourself, at some point you're like, oh, I'm good. But then you have to make the thing about like bigger things. I mean, if like weird example, if Elon Musk just makes money for himself, he would have stopped like years ago. But now he makes it about the civilization and all of that, because like he clearly doesn't need money, but he still works very hard because he has higher visions and he had higher goals above himself. And I think this is also, probably, I don't know if I don't have any science to that. It's just that I think this is one of the biggest longevity things is your mind, like your actual, like, how are you doing? What are you doing with your mind, and what are you working towards? That's why I'm looking at the retirement topic very cautiously, because Bitcoin might retire all of us in like 5-10 years, but it's really, really dangerous to stop doing everything and just like do nothing, because I think your body and your mind really fast just erodes away.
It's, as you're saying that, again, like there was this chart that was circulating, when was it? Maybe like 3 weeks ago. And so don't quote me on this, but it was showing how like anyone who works, for every year you have to work past the age of, if I remember correctly, it was something like 55. For every year you worked past 55, you ended up having a shorter lifespan by 2 years. And what was really interesting about this is what I think it highlights is that if you're able to retire young, and when I say retire, I'm not meaning you stop working, I'm meaning you have freedom to direct your energy where you see fit. So you can be entrepreneurial, you can start up other hobbies, you can start to get involved in your community, you can find like deeper meaning as opposed to I'm simply just working to survive. And what was interesting is that so people that for every year after 55 that you retired, you lost 2 years of lifespan. So people retiring at 67, many times what that was highlighting is this is an individual who has maybe had to work because they couldn't afford to not work. So by the time they retired, they didn't really know who they were, what interested them, where to find purpose, where to find meaning. And their life was pretty abruptly cut short after 67, like into the early 70s. Whereas people that retired in their early 50s, their life tended to extend long past 80, just because they were individuals that found meaning, to your point. And I think that even just being in the Bitcoin space, I think what you're starting to recognize is a lot of these individuals have their day job, and then they go out of their way to have a podcast, to be able to go to all of these various Bitcoin events, to be able to give value back, start a Bitcoin meetup. And I think we really feel drawn to creating value. We really feel drawn to how do I show up and be my best self? And how do I also put humanity first and push this technology that has profound implications on my kids, my grandkids, and the future moving forward?
And there's nothing more beautiful if you created value and you can see how someone else benefited from that. And this is probably one of the, maybe I even talked about that with you in the last podcast about that. But I'm not sure. This is probably the biggest motivation for me to go to conferences, because at every single conference up until now, at least one person came up to me and said, hey, your podcast orange pilled me and it changed my life. And I'm like, this is the sole reason why I'm working so hard. Obviously, there's like reasons for myself. There's reasons for like providing for other people. And like, there's a lot of reasons for that. But this is the main reason why it makes so much fun, because I see in the real world how another person that I don't even know about actually benefits from that in his real life. Because it's sometimes if you make a podcast and you just speak with your guests, it's like, oh yeah, like you get that many views and like that many average view durations and all of that, and like it just feels like a game. But then you go to the real world and you're like, oh, there's an actual person watching my actual podcast and he actually got a better life because of this weird thing that I'm doing on the internet. It just makes it real. And I just want to make that point, because this there's no better feeling to know that you made a difference in someone else's life, and you made some like this is so much better than receiving from a sponsor like $5,000, like so much better.
I could not agree more. And I'm actually curious. So prior to Bitcoin, have you ever been in like an educational role or a communicative role where you're passing knowledge on to people?
Not really. Nah, not really. Like, of course, like you're always a little bit in that role. I was working for 6 years. Like I gave knowledge to here and there some person, and I tutored small cousins of mine. Like I had a small things going, but nothing even close to comparative what I'm doing right now.
Do you think, like, when you got into the podcast space, did you have expectations? And like, secondly, do you feel like the outcome of educating, supporting people in their journey, was it what you expected, like how you would feel?
Not at all. I think I told that once on a podcast. My only goal and expectation for my podcast was I want to talk with all those cool Bitcoiners myself. Like literally, that was my sole purpose in the beginning for my podcast. I wasn't out for money. I wasn't out for fame. I wasn't out for anything else, or like for educating other people, or like for providing something like that. I literally just was like, I saw all those podcasters. I saw all those people like Jeff Booth and Microseed and all of them. And I was like, I want to talk to them. And I guess a Bitcoin podcast is my only chance. And then I started that, and I was like, oh shit, I really enjoy that actually. Like, and not just talking with them, but I actually enjoy the process of marketing the podcast. So, this was, I don't know if it sounds very simple, but this is literally, one of the major reasons why I actually did the podcast.
That is amazing. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts, but I would say, like, there are two amazing avenues that I think are massively underutilized. The first avenue for me is writing a book. Like, if you are curious and you think you have the capacity to write a book, it is amazing how many doors writing a book opens. The amount of times that I've had long form courses online and people are like, oh, cool, you've got a course. But then if I take that course and just convert it into pages and say, oh, it's now a book, people are like, you're an author. And it's just opened up so many doors and invites to conferences and the ability to be able to speak and meeting some of the most fascinating individuals. And that wasn't the reason why I wrote the book, but it's been kind of this indirect byproduct of writing a book that has just profoundly changed my life. And so I really urge anyone, like, if you're curious and you've got ideas, share those ideas, put those on paper. But secondly, I'm curious to hear your thoughts, but I feel as if, and I've spoken to a friend who has a podcast as well, starting a podcast just gives you access to all of these individuals. Like, if you just sent someone a random message, if you sent James Lavish or Lynn Alden just a message and said, hey, I'd love to chat with you for an hour on the phone, they're just going to be like, no. Whereas if you reach out to them and just say, hey, by any chance, like, I've got a podcast, would you come on? Most Bitcoiners are just like, absolutely, let's chat. And so I feel like having a podcast is this like secret superpower to being able to have conversations with some of the most profound, wise, incredible individuals. And not only are you then now creating value because you're putting out content that supports others in their journey, but you're also being able to interact with people. And I very much believe, like, one of my favorite quotes is, you are the average of the top 5 people you spend your time with. And so when you're spending time with these amazing individuals, I think energetically, it's altering how you show up as well.
And my biggest takeaway from the podcast so far, like outside of like being able to speak with them, outside of like providing educational value, is actually my own educational journey, because I've learned so much through the podcast, not just about Bitcoin. Obviously, Bitcoin is my biggest thing that I've learned, because like every single conversation has at least, mostly actually a big portion, but at least a small portion of Bitcoin conversations in there. But then also most of my guests are 15, 20, sometimes even like 30 or 40 years older than me. Some even like, I think 50 years older was my oldest guest. I think it was 75, and I was 25. So I think 50 years older than me. And the amount of wisdom and knowledge you get from just speaking with so many different individuals in terms of relationships, in terms of life, in terms of motivation, in terms of wisdom in general, it's really, really, really huge. And the fun thing is, I still have my same girlfriend that I had already when I started the podcast. And we kind of talked about that, how massively I grew in just having the podcast itself, because she knew me before the podcast and she knows me now. And she's like, the podcast and many other different factors almost made me a better man. There are so many small things that you learn from just interacting with people and just listening to the conversations. And also, like a little bit before podcast, sometimes it happens that we stop the podcast, then we talk for another hour. It's rarely, but like here and there it happens. And so you just get to talk with so many different people. And as I said, in the beginning, I started the podcast for being able to talk to those people, but my real motivation should have been to learn from those people, to actually get the skills and the knowledge and the experience from just people that already have lived a lot more life than I'm 27. I have no life experience. I mean, I have some life experience with 27, but compared to George Boudin, who was now 3 times on the podcast, who was a fighter pilot and all of that, and who is, I don't know, 40 years older than me, or like, I don't know, 30 years, I don't even know. But he was a lot older than me. The life experience just getting from all those people, it really benefits you massively. It's like having 200 uncles that are all amazing, and you can learn from them like every single day. It's kind of a cheat code, honestly.
That is such a good analogy, the 200 uncles. And you know, like my background, we've spoken about this maybe on what previous podcasts. My background, I've always been really interested in trauma, childhood development, psychology. How do we become who we are? And in one of these books called Hold On to Your Kids by a guy called Gabor Mate, he talks about how if you look at certain movements, let's take like the hippie movement. The hippie movement nearly died out within one generation. And then you go and look at something like the Aborigines in Australia. And the Aborigines, there is some evidence that we're able to trace them back 80, 90, 100,000 years. And so you're wondering, what is it about the Aborigine movement as opposed to the hippie movement, which was able to like transcend these immense, vast spans of time? And what he talks about is it's the difference between a peer movement and a elder movement. So it's when we spend time with simply our peers, well, we just want to look the same, we want to sound the same, we want to dress the same, because we're trying to conform and fit in with a social circle. But usually they're the same age. And so we're just kind of navigating this world together. There isn't much knowledge gained. Whereas when you look at these, like the Aborigines, when you start to recognize that, man, they transcend tens of thousands of years, the difference is that you are spending time across multiple generations. You're interacting with your parents, you're interacting with your grandparents, you're interacting with your great-grandparents many times, and you're living in close quarters. And it's people that have already been on this planet for 10, 20, 30, 40 years longer than you. They have so much more knowledge and different perspective. And so that's what I love about Bitcoin, is that it transcends age. Like you end up spending time with people that are younger than you, that have such a unique insight because they grew up in a very different world to you. And then you end up spending time with people that are much older than you, that are sharing their perspective from their life journey. And so whenever I go along to these Bitcoin meetups, what I love is it's just, you can get everyone from kids all the way through to elderly people from all different backgrounds, different cultures. And so this is where, when I compare it to, say, the hippie movement, I feel like Bitcoin has lasting power because we're talking about ideas across generations as opposed to like an inter-peer relationship.
Do you think that actually Bitcoin can start a similar movement? Something like where we start with money, but then we have this weird movement going on, this cultural movement, where we can maybe even start something like the Aborigine movement, where we have culture where we talk about things, where we come together, and this kind of transcends over time? Or is this just because we are weird and early in this movement?
No. I think that's a really, really interesting question, because I tend to look at Bitcoin from the perspective that the irony of Bitcoin being money is that it gets us to stop thinking about money. And so fiat money today, because money is losing purchasing power basically is just going nowhere. Our cost of living is rising. House prices are rising. It's getting harder and harder to show up. It gives us less time to be able to think about, who am I and how do I want to show up? What is it that actually motivates me? What is it that I want to direct my time and energy towards? And so I think that as we transition towards Bitcoin, we're in a unique phase right now, because we're preaching about Bitcoin, the act of it being money and the benefits of Bitcoin. But let's just say we fast forward 50 years and we're on a Bitcoin standard. The global population is using Bitcoin. Well, I don't think we're going to necessarily be talking about Bitcoin in the same way, in that Bitcoin is this amazing money and everyone should be using Bitcoin because we're using it. And just how we don't just stand there and just talk about and have podcasts about the US dollar. We don't talk about the British pound. We're going to ultimately see the repercussions of that on a societal level. And I think that it's going to build a much more cohesive society, because if people have more capacity, if their cost of living is falling as opposed to rising, if they're able to spend more time in community, more time giving back, more time with their kids, I think we're going to see mental health improve. I think we're going to see a drop in, say, things like substance abuse and anxiety and depression and all of these things that are repercussions of people not having capacity, where their life is being infringed upon because it's getting harder to be able to show up. And so I think the repercussions are we're going to have a lot more cohesive society. So ultimately, like, I look at Bitcoin as like the ultimate spiritual tool, where it just gives us more capacity to show up more authentically and question like who we are and how we want to show up, and what is this thing called life, and kind of asking these bigger questions.
Yeah, because as we come back through the initial topic where we talked about how Bitcoin can retire us, and then it's like, what do you want to do with that? And so when we think about how lives get shortened when we have to do something that we don't want to do, so we just work to survive, which nobody really wants to do, obviously, we have kind of bad stress. But if we then have just Bitcoin that supports us, and then we can actually ask those meaningful questions. Hey, what do I want to do with my life? It's almost like what do you? I hate bringing up like family examples, but my aunt recently, I had a conversation with her, and it was kind of fun because she said, "Oh yeah, I work at the company, but I really don't want to put more hours in, and I also really don't have to put more hours in." And so for the past year, she kind of tried to find something to do, because she's like, okay, I clean the house, I do all those things with the kids, and then there's still like half a day left. And now she goes on courses, on massages, and like massaging courses, and she goes in physical therapy things so she can help people, and she finds new things. And I'm like, that's a great example of someone not having the work, but actually going ahead and finding something they like. And I told her, you could do this and probably in the long run make more money with that, helping people in physical therapy and with massages, than what you're doing currently with your job, because this is actually something you're passionate about it, and you found it because you wanted to do something with your life, not because you had to make money. And I think this is really exciting for me, to look at Bitcoiners today that no longer have to work in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, depending on like the age and the stack and all of that, what they can do if the finances is kind of figured out, and they can just try to figure out, what do I really want to do with my life? I think we have a very healthy society then.
Man, I could not agree more. And to me, it's almost like, if I was to pinpoint what is so powerful about Bitcoin, is it gives people curiosity back, because it's just like, as our purchasing power is increasing as opposed to declining, as life is getting easier, we can be more curious. And if we're more curious, that's when we start taking on more responsibility. We start taking on more accountability. We start actually making decisions for ourselves. And I think that today, the world we live in, because life is getting harder, we're looking for ways to distract ourselves. We're looking for a way out. And so we spend our time on social media. We spend our time on Netflix. We're simply trying to bide time until the next work day. And then we get home, we bide time until the next work day. And not only that, but I think that when we have limited capacity, we put off a lot of our decision making onto so-called experts. And so you know what? I feel sick. I'm just going to go to the doctor. And then you ask the doctor, what do I need to do for my health? Well, you need to take this pill. Okay, I'm just going to trust the doctor. What do I need to do for my kids in education? Well, I'm just going to put them in school. What am I going to do for like food? Well, they say this is healthy, so I'm going to eat this thing. And ultimately, we've got a society that's getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And they feel like they've got less and less autonomy. And then you start looking at Bitcoiners and you ask them questions about health. You ask them questions about education. You ask them questions about the pharmaceutical industry. And they've got deep understanding about most of these industries because they've had more capacity to be curious. And so I think the world is a healthier place when people take on more accountability, more autonomy, and to be able to kind of choose their path intentionally, as opposed to kind of having their path chosen for them because life is hard.
And this is a really interesting thing because I was in a job till last year, February. So I don't know, like 1.5 years now, something like that. And the first 3 months, I struggled with the freedom I had. I struggled with the lack of schedule that someone else put out for me because I've been working in that job for 6 years and being 6 years in a job where you do everything every day the same, every week the same. And it's kind of a routine thing. You really get used to having like Monday morning meetings and Wednesday morning, like those, like you do those routines you really get used to and you miss those things and you're like, oh shit, like why do I miss that? And you struggle hard to find a rhythm and you then one day work too much, one day you are distracted, then you're like it was really, I struggled a lot the first like 3 to 4 months with the freedom I had because it shows the podcasting path, because it shows the Bitcoin path. But then you kind of figure it out. And all of a sudden you wake up in the morning excited and you're like, what am I going to do today? Like I can do whatever. I met today with an old buddy of mine and he's like, oh, I have to go back to work. What are you doing? And I'm like, I don't know. Let's see. I have one meeting today with Seb, like right now. This was my only meeting today. I did a lot of work today, but I didn't have a plan yesterday what I do today. It's just like, what seems to be the things that I have to do right now. And then it's like, okay, I've done that. It's 9 a.m. Okay, what can I research? What can I do? How can I improve the podcast? How can I reach out to someone? It's really, really cool if you have the freedom, because all of a sudden you choose to do those things that you always wanted to do. And I have this weird theory. I mean, I think it's a theory that a lot of people have. AI is taking all the lame jobs that nobody wants to do. And so we can focus on the cool things to do, on the creative things, on the things that our human minds are made for, and not this like I'm filling out another Excel sheet. Who cares? Like AI will do all those things. Like if you're doing something very boring, you can just assume in 5 years AI will do your job. Like I'm very sure of that. I've seen it already in just like the podcasting world. When I started doing podcasts, I had to edit all those scenes myself together. Now I press on a button, and if I talk, he puts me on. If you have an interesting reaction to what I'm saying, AI will see that and put you on for a second on the screen. And then if it's an interesting conversation, puts us both on the same screen. No editor has to do this anymore because AI knows those things. It's just a very small example, but AI will take a lot of jobs so we can focus on the interesting stuff. I don't know if this makes sense.
No, absolutely. And I think we're about to transition into a very different world to the world of which we've been in. And I think about this quite frequently, like what does that world look like, and who is going to be the individual that succeeds in such a world? And I think that where we're moving towards is traditionally people have been specialists. And this has been all the way back to the dawn of time. You've got the bread maker, and you've got the blacksmith, and you've got the butcher, and you've got the doctor, and you spend your whole life training in one specific area, and then you offer that to society. Well, what's interesting is that AI in many ways is taking a lot of these specialist jobs, because it can many times be better than the individual who's trained for many years, because it can ingest every single medical book out there. It can ingest every single book on, you name it, whatever topic. And so I think that a lot of these specialist roles may slowly wither away or disappear. And where humans come in is we have an incredible capacity for connecting the dots between random disparate ideas. We're kind of like creative connections. We're able to be like artistic. And this is why we saw like the Renaissance, like you're seeing a rise in how we think about art and creativity. And so I think that individuals that have a broad knowledge base, that are able to connect the dots between different ideas, are going to be the ones that are able to use AI in such unique ways. Like already I'm seeing, like with, say, vibe coding. I'll give an example. For those that aren't familiar with what vibe coding is, it's kind of arisen this year. And the idea is that you jump on AI and you start chatting with, say, ChatGPT, and you say, hey, I want to build an app. I want to build this app, and I want it to do this thing. And well, code is just language. Just like English, it's just language. And so AI is phenomenal at writing code. And so you don't need to be a web developer anymore. You don't need to have a deep understanding of Python or C#. You're able to just like speak to these AI bots, and they're able to do incredible things. And so for me, I was like, okay, I've got this idea. I have a friend who's going through a really hard divorce right now. And unfortunately, she receives some really hostile messages from her ex-husband. These hostile messages are super emotionally charged, and the moment they land in her inbox, it fries her nervous system. So I was like, I wonder if I can figure something out here. So I ended up vibe coding, and I'm not a developer. I need to put that out there. I'm not a developer, but I had an idea. I was able to think about, my friend has got a problem. She's dealing with hostile messages. I think I can fix this by doing A, B, and C, and I'll describe what that A, B, and C is. And through technology, I was able to do this thing. And this is where I think technology is going. It's if you have an idea, you can rapid prototype, you can bring this thing into existence, unlike anything that we've ever been able to do before, without the need for immense capital allocation, without the need for paying for 3 or 4 developers, having chief technical officers, chief product officers. You're able to bring something into fruition just because you're passionate about it. And so anyway, my friend had this challenge, and I ended up thinking, I think if I was to connect to her Gmail and I was to use AI, I would be able to take that hostile email, and the moment it arrives in her inbox, I would move it into a folder titled under his name. So she doesn't have to see the email. It comes in and then is immediately moved away, so it doesn't fry her nervous system. Then it takes the body of the email and feeds it into a AI chatbot that I've created. And the chatbot is basically trained to be like a psychologist that removes hostile information and just gives the actionable content. And so let's say you received a hostile email from your ex-partner, but the problem is you have a kid, and at one point it asks them, hey, what time are you picking up our kid to go play tennis? So you've got to read through normally the whole email to get that one question. And so the chatbot takes out the actionable content and then sends you an email with just the actionable content, and then you respond to that email, and then it takes your response and feeds it back to the original email. So the person who sent you the hostile email never has to know that your email is being filtered. They never have to know that you never read the whole email, because you're still responding to the questions, but you're just not getting that hostility. You're not getting any of that really emotionally charged words that fry your nervous system. And for me, even 5 years ago, if you wanted to build this, you would have needed a couple developers. You probably would have needed a product officer or a chief technical officer, curious individuals, and probably $50,000 to $100,000 minimum. And now I built it with about $40 worth of credits on Cursor, which tapped into ChatGPT, and it's now live. And so in my mind, I'm just like, technology is profound. And so the people that I believe are going to be driving humanity forward are going to be the ones that they don't necessarily have to be experts. They don't have to be specialists. They have to be curious about this world and have a broad knowledge base and they're piecing together these issues that people are facing, and then they're able to rapid prototype things and bring things into existence and test their ideas super quickly, and then they're going to be able to have actionable information as to whether or not something works or something doesn't work, which we've never had before.
This is fascinating. How do you think Bitcoin fits in this whole new AI world?
I think at a very, very high level, I think that if AI is unbelievably smart, if AI does have such a depth of knowledge, then AI is naturally going to, in time, be able to transact. And AI, if it's going to be transacting, it's going to be asking, well, AI doesn't have lifespan. AI doesn't have 80 years left on this planet. AI potentially has indefinite time into the future. And so AI is going to be asking one question. What money is going to preserve my purchasing power into the future? What money can I be confident that if I was to store this value, that I can still buy the same amount or ideally more into the future? And the answer is Bitcoin. And so I think that from a purely rational perspective, I think AI is going to choose Bitcoin, because if AI looks at the US dollar or the Canadian dollar or the New Zealand dollar or the euro, what it's going to say is just like, this has got a useless track record. And if I'm going to be living indefinitely into the future, why would I ever get paid in a monetary system that is losing purchasing power year over year over year?
100%. It's like, it's a no-brainer. Because AI collects all the information from all the humans, and we humans know that like not collect, like we very much know that Bitcoin is the best thing that you can possibly store your wealth in, and so AI will want to have that long term. It's so interesting to see, because we will have those AI agents to do just things for us, and they will want to be paid in Bitcoin. It's natural. Like there's no discussion for me, like even like for fiat or like for stable coins or anything like that. Of course, technically it would be possible for them to have like stable coin accounts or like even fiat bank accounts. Like it would be possible, but why would they want that? They would just choose Bitcoin, as humans also will choose Bitcoin. It's just a matter of time.
And I think that AI also doesn't have to deal with the issue of ego. And I think that as an individual, if you ask them, hey, are you interested in Bitcoin? Would you invest in Bitcoin? Would you save in Bitcoin? They're going to say, well, it's used by criminals. Oh, it's boiling the oceans. Oh, it's whatever FUD you want to talk about. And what you recognize is this is usually coming from one, they're getting narratives pushed down from mainstream media that are inaccurate. So AI automatically, because it has access to this basically immense database of everything that we've ever written, it can immediately push through any FUD because it's going to have the answer, the legitimate answer. And then two, you've got this idea of like social conformity. And I think Bitcoin is still fringe in a sense that there's a lot of individuals that they won't adopt it simply because it is not mainstream, simply because their community seems to have a negative association with it. And they don't want to look, they don't want to be kind of ostracized from society. And so because of that, we have this hurdle where once you actually dig into Bitcoin, you realize Bitcoin is not what everyone says it is. Bitcoin is far more powerful. It's much a deeper, more thought-provoking technology than just these other crypto tokens or all of the bad things that people say about Bitcoin. And I think that AI can look through this, one, because it doesn't have ego. Two, it doesn't have this social conformity. It wants to kind of conform to local society. And yeah, it's able to see through all of this FUD immediately because it has access to answers.
100%. It's actually interesting. I wanted to start off with the one topic you just said before the recording with maps versus territory. I just realized that we're already like 45 minutes in, almost like at the end of the podcast. But what did you want to talk with maps versus territory? Because I didn't fully got it when you first explained it.
Totally. So I recently wrote this article called like The Curated World. And you can find this on my blog, which is just sebbunny.com. And the idea behind The Curated World is I kind of start off with kind of this story where, take North Korea. North Korea is built upon something called the Juche ideology. The Juche ideology is like a Marxist ideology. And it's this idea that, okay, if you want to control a population, you control language. And so there's no word for liberty. There's no word for oppressed. There's no word for I love my family or I love my partner. There's only words for I love my leader. And so what's really interesting is you've altered someone's experience because someone doesn't have the capacity to express it in words. If you don't have a word for stressed, or you don't have a word for feeling oppressed, or you don't have a word for like I love my family, how do you have that experience? And so what's really interesting is that if you want to control a large swath of the population, you control language. And so to me, language is a map. And so there's a really famous quote that I absolutely love called "The map is not the territory." And so for people that aren't necessarily like familiar with this idea, the map is not the territory, the way that I think about it is a map is simply a representation of reality. It is not reality. So if I was to go to, I don't know, I lived in Whistler for many years, the ski resort of Whistler. If I'm looking at a map of Whistler, and then I'm looking up at Whistler itself, the physical location, the map can be intricately detailed, but the map will never be the territory. And so maps can also be deceiving. If I'm standing at the base of a big ridge line and I'm looking on the map and I'm like, the ridge line isn't there, but I'm looking on the map and it says there should be a ridge line, all of a sudden I'm lost because I'm like, where am I in relation to this map? And so maps can be deceiving. Maps can mislead us and hide aspects of our experience. To the example of North Korea, if we're feeling stressed, we're feeling oppressed, but we don't have words, then we can't navigate that space. We don't know where to go. And so this idea of the curated world is kind of diving into a thought that I had, which is there are many of these maps that we use to navigate this world. The maps of sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, the map of relationships. Many times that's been passed down by our mum, our dad, how they interact with one another. Maps of money. Well, money needs to be centralized. Prices rise over the long term. Deflation is destabilizing. There's these maps we use that we inherit from our culture, from our communities, from our families. And we walk through this world and we never really question these maps. We never really question, is this map as accurate as it could be? And I think that what's fascinating about Bitcoiners is that we have ultimately torn up one of the hardest maps to tear up. We've torn up the map of money. If you go and speak to most individuals out there, most individuals will say, government needs to control money. Like, who's going to oversee the transactions? Who's going to oversee the money supply? Who's going to oversee interest rates? And then they will say, well, naturally prices rise. That's just reality. And they'll say, naturally, if prices fall and we experience deflation, well, that's massively destabilizing and the world is going to collapse. And so we've got this map with these beliefs on it. But what we've recognized as Bitcoiners when we go and read the history books, when we go and read this information, is that this map does not represent reality. This doesn't even represent anything close to reality. Actually, we can have a decentralized monetary system, one that is separate from any state or entity. We can have a monetary system that actually maps onto reality, whereby prices should fall over time as society becomes more efficient, as progress and productivity increases, and naturally prices should fall. And that's not destabilizing if we're not in a debt-based system. And so as Bitcoiners, I think it's really fascinating because we're in this perfect position where we have already torn up one of the hardest maps to tear up, that is the map of money, and we're already redrawing that map to one that maps reality more effectively. And the person with the most accurate map is the one who's going to be able to navigate the world more accurately, because otherwise we're trying to use a map that does not represent reality, and it's very easy to get lost.
I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called Microseed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today, and you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. Again, that's microseed.io to get your last backup tool you ever need. The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I finally and officially mine Bitcoin. This is not just something to stack more Satoshis, but it's most importantly also to support the network. Individual miners are the ones that keep the Bitcoin network decentralized. And by the way, you get KYC free Bitcoin. That's why I use simplemining. I get an actual proper Bitcoin miner. They set it up for me. They repair it if it breaks down. And most importantly, they let me choose the pool and even connect my own full node. I'm completely sovereign and I'm completely in control, and I can sign up with Ocean, no account needed. I just give them a Bitcoin address and then there's mining going on. No KYC, nothing. So if you're ready to mine Bitcoin, go to simplemining.io, tell them you come from Robin, and let's mine Bitcoin together.
That's fascinating. It's really interesting because this also explains why people that learn different languages, why people that learn as many different things as possible, like just have such a major advantage in life in general, because they learn those different languages. They learn maybe the language of IT security. They learn the language of Bitcoin. They learn the language or the map of many different areas. And that's why I think why reading is so important, and listening to audiobooks, like whatever like your favorite form is, or even to podcasts and all of those long form things instead of TikTok and Instagram Reels, because you actually dive into a new world. And I have this concept that if you're young and you're 20 years old, you have no clue of the world and what's possible for yourself, because you didn't acquire in your language the map of things that are possible. A small example for that, with 18 years old, I recorded a video explaining what I want from life, and I'm 30 years old. And I had a small segment in there, which was financial goals. Those financial goals I made with 18 years old, I reached with 21 years old, not with 30, because I set them so freaking low, like I was just not, with 18 years old, my horizon was that big because I didn't have the map for all the things that are coming. And so I always also say that the biggest disadvantage every person has are the things he doesn't know about. The things, not the things that he already knows, or like where he's a small but like the things where he doesn't even know about them, that it's possible. Like someone that works at Walmart, he cannot comprehend what the world of someone that makes companies look like, because he doesn't have a map to like what's actually there. But he has the ability. I think truly everyone has the ability to do anything. They just have to acquire the right maps to actually acquire the knowledge and the experience and the skills to do those things. So I heard that today for the first time, but I love the map analogy of those are kind of the language barriers or the map barriers, like what we can do. That's fascinating.
No, and like you bring up some really interesting points, and there's a famous quote at the start of The Big Short. And so a lot of people have probably watched The Big Short, like talks about the 2008 housing crisis. And the famous quote right at the very start of the movie is one that stands with me. And it's something along the lines of, it's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know that just ain't so. And so to me, it's kind of like there's many maps that we use to navigate this world. We think the map represents reality, but the map isn't anywhere close to reality. And so where my mind goes when I think about this is the maps of the sciences. So physics and chemistry and biology. And specifically, say, let's take the map of physics. Well, the map of physics is really interesting because we have these things like the laws of thermodynamics. Now, we use the term law, and it makes it sound like, well, this is written in stone. This is just how the world works. But actually, if you go start digging around on YouTube, you start to realize there's actually many things that break the laws of thermodynamics. There's individuals in their garage building what are called perpetual motion machines. Now, a perpetual motion machine defies the laws of thermodynamics because what's basically happening is you're getting out more energy than you put in. That defies both the first law of thermodynamics, which is energy cannot be created nor destroyed, and it defies the second law of thermodynamics around entropy, which is usually when you are transmuting a form of energy, there's going to be energy loss into some form of something else, like heat or whatever, friction. Something else is going to be created, which is going to displace that energy. So you can never get out more energy than you put in. Well, when you start looking at some of these machines people are building these perpetual energy machines where they're getting out more energy than they put in, which goes against the laws of thermodynamics. One quick example is like if you have a tube and you have a hydrophobic gel and you rub the hydrophobic gel in the inside of the tube and then you put that tube in water, it starts cycling water indefinitely. And so that's now created something where you could harness energy from it, but very little energy has gone into the creation of this thing. So that defies the laws of thermodynamics. So the reason why I say this is that physics is still just a map. It is not the territory. And are these laws or are they just theories? And if they're theories, that means they could be wrong. And if they could be wrong, that means our map is not allowing us to see reality as it is. It means that we could have access to like abundant energy. We could have access to a world that looks very different from the world we live in today. And so then it kind of brings you to this question, well, okay, if they're not laws and they are just theories, why would someone kind of hide that information from us? And you start to recognize that ultimately what creates value is scarcity. All of these wars are fought on resources. People want access to resources, scarce resources. So if we have access to abundant energy, that completely changes our economic societal structure. Governments would no longer have the same amount of power. These big corporations would no longer have the same amount of power if we had access to abundant energy. And so I think that when you start questioning this, the map is not the territory, and you start realizing that some of these sciences aren't even tracking the territory, you realize that the world could be very different. And so it kind of brings up a question in my mind, which is like, okay, if these maps aren't necessarily accurate, is there any evidence of this? And this is where like my mind was blown away. I watched this documentary a little while back. This is probably maybe 2 years ago. And it's called The Lost Century. And in The Lost Century, it kind of like quickly kind of moves over this idea that in the US, back in, I think it was 1951, there was something enacted by Congress called the Invention Secrecy Act. And the Invention Secrecy Act is if the government, I wonder if I can find the quote, because the quote is pretty fascinating. It basically says, the U.S. Invention Secrecy Act of 1951 is a law allowing the U.S. government to issue a secrecy order on patent applications for national security reasons, effectively preventing inventors from disclosing, selling, or commercializing their invention. Well, that basically means that if a technology advances enough that it potentially threatens the government can suppress that technology. And so if its control structure is threatened, we're never going to hear about that technology. Well, up until 2024, there had been 6,741 patents that had completely disappeared from the patent office that could profoundly change the world we live in today. And I think that our understanding of science prevents us from seeing that world. And one example of this is there's a guy in the 90s called Stanley Meyer. And Stanley Meyer created a car, a water-powered car. And this water-powered car on 4 liters of water got 180 kilometers of range. We don't have water-powered cars in society today. We think it is impossible. And this guy had a water-powered car that got 180 kilometers of range, and he was in the middle of doing a deal with licensees. He was in a restaurant in New York, I believe it was. He was doing a deal with licensees, and he stood up and just said, I've been poisoned died, and then his patent disappeared from the patent office. And that technology never surfaced. And so you're looking into this world and you're just like, oh my God, like what technology do we potentially have access to, but our maps don't allow us to see it? And the final point that I'll quickly make, because I recognize I'm rambling, but the final point I'll kind of quickly make is there's a guy, you guys may be familiar with him. His name is Eric Weinstein. And Eric Weinstein is kind of, the way I'd interpret it, he's like a mathematician, physicist. He's fascinating. And he kind of coined this term, and you guys can look up this. He talks about it a lot. He coined this term DISC, the distributed idea suppression complex. And this idea of DISC is that science is very controlled. Science only advances where they let science advance. And there's kind of, the way that I see it, the way I interpret what he's saying is there's kind of like 5 stages which impede science from advancing naturally. So the first stage is government funding. In most sectors of science, most areas of science, 50 to 70% of all funding comes from the government. So if you're not diving into something that the government deems reasonable and interesting, or they allow you to study, you're probably just not going to get funding. So immediately stops dead. You can't go and study that thing. Secondly, you've got like regulatory oversight. You've got all of these regulatory bodies which govern these scientific areas, and they say what you can and can't do. And one of the points he makes is that when it comes to physics, after the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb, there are areas of physics which are illegal to study. They're essentially illegal to even think about. If you get caught thinking about these, you can go to prison. So you're like, this is wild. Like, you can't even think about areas of physics. And so you've got government funding, then you've got the regulatory bodies telling you what you can and can't do. Then you've got the scientific journals, which are usually controlled by centralized entities. They're governing what information is in these scientific journals. So they're blocking anything that goes against mainstream narrative or the status quo that could disrupt whole industries. And then on top of that, you've got the peer review system. So if you even want to get into the scientific journals, you have to usually be peer reviewed, which means you're being reviewed by a peer in the industry, which means if you're disrupting their balance sheet, if you're disrupting their bottom line, well, they're just not going to review you. So then you can't even get into the scientific journals. And then finally, you've got kind of these cultural and career incentives. If you're a scientist and you've got to feed a family, well, you've got to receive money. So if you can't get funding, you can't go study these things. And so the world we live in today, unfortunately, there are like government funding, there's regulatory oversight, there's scientific journals, there's peer review system, there's the cultural and career incentives that basically impede science from moving forward in a natural direction. And to me, what I think is just so profound about Bitcoin is the first time in history that we've really been able to effectively separate money and state. And so first off, it means if the government is only able to receive money from offering value to society, and the government now has to be fiscally responsible, so it's got to balance its books effectively, what that means is the government now has an incentive to figure out, okay, I've got to minimize my expenditure. If I'm minimizing my expenditure, maybe we should put more emphasis on research and technology that actually can help create abundance, as opposed to me kneecapping it and just supporting corporations and being able to fund regulatory bodies that suppress information. So that's kind of the first incentive. It incentivizes government to actually think about how do we actually create an abundant future so I minimize my expenses. Second, if individuals have more capacity and you're able to start questioning the world around you and start diving into these curiosities, but not only that, your purchasing power is increasing, then that means that you're able to dig into these scientific bodies and actually start to do your own research. There's going to be a lot more private funding as opposed to government funding. And so I think Bitcoin is going to create a renaissance in science just simply because it's going to remove the funding mechanism and the kneecapping mechanism of government and regulatory bodies and shift it towards curiosity, private funding, and such. But to me, I just find this subject so fascinating. Anyway, I apologize, I just rambled at you.
I love your rambles. That's why I keep reinviting you. I love the rambles. It is really interesting, but very confusing for me, because if everything is just maps and everything is just, we don't really know what's true, then it's like, how do we know what's the real territory? Like what are the actual laws that are not really laws? Like it's almost like I bring that example up because I think it's a very very good one in that case. When we look at food and what we should eat, there should be such an easy question to ask and such an easy question to answer, because like we have been eating food for a very long time as humanity. And so by now it seems like we figured out we shoot rockets into the sky. So we probably should have figured out what to eat in a day. But it's so confusing because there's all those different fields and different studies in all those different directions in so many different diets. And so when I look then at what you explained with maps, it's like, okay, if we cannot know that this is true or that is true, then it's like, how do we even know anything is true? Like, how do we even know like what makes sense and what is like what's actually law and what is like just a language?
No, and this is a really good question. And I think that in my mind, and I think this is a point that Nassim Taleb made in one of his books a while back, and he said something like, there's only two types of science. There's science that has been proven false, and science that has not yet been proven false. And those are the only two types of science, because with enough time and enough information and our perspective shifting, we may be able to prove something false that we previously believed was true. And so to me, I don't find it destabilizing that we don't know what truth is with a capital T. But I don't necessarily know if we're ever going to know what truth is with a capital T. I think that ultimately what I just hope for is a society where the maps we use are the best approximation of reality given the information we have. And so what that means is at any point in time, you could effectively hit pause, and our map, given the information we have, is the best approximation of reality. But I think that the problem we face today is because of the financial incentives and a broken monetary system, that is not true. Our maps are being curated to be able to hide aspects of society, aspects of the world we live in, aspects of the various sciences, to be able to prevent people from traversing that landscape, from diving into those subjects. That is what I find frustrating, is when we're being kneecapped and we're not able to explore reality as closely as we could do if we actually just had maps that mapped reality more effectively. And so kind of back to your question, I don't necessarily think it's about just finding truth. I think that our truth is always going to be evolving with more information, but it's about hoping that our maps are as accurate as possible. And one of the biggest drivers for inaccurate maps is misaligned incentives. And I think there's just too many financial incentives that kneecap the sciences and kneecap our maps being redrawn.
It's really interesting because if you think about it, the person that is open to being wrong has a major advantage over the person that is not open to maybe being proven wrong, because we all have to this day things in our mind that we know is right, but it actually isn't right. Like, I'm sure if we dig deep enough, there's a lot of belief sets that I currently have that will probably turn out to be wrong. And I mean, Bitcoin was one famous one for me that I was always like thinking that it's a scam until I didn't think that anymore. And so it's a blissful world if you're not aware of that. Because if you're just like, oh, like, yeah, things are like that and I know it and like it's nice. But being open to the idea of being constantly wrong and being aware of all the things that you haven't learned, or being aware of all the things that you don't understand, it's almost intimidating. It's almost like, oh shit, like how do I know anything now? It's like the more you read, I think this is most Bitcoiners went through that journey. In the beginning, you think about Bitcoin something, and then you dive a little bit deeper in, and the more you dive in, the more different topics all of a sudden pop up, and the more you dive in, the more you realize how much you haven't understood and how much you haven't learned about Bitcoin. And I think this is true with so many different topics that the deeper you go, it's almost like a pyramid into the rabbit hole, where in the beginning you see the small rabbit hole, and the rabbit hole gets actually broader and broader, and it gets harder and harder to actually go deeper. And it's sometimes intimidating of like, oh, like I don't know all those things. Like I have to learn so much. And it's like, will I be finished with like the next 100 years to learn even like half of the stuff?
Well, and like, it goes back to the conversation that we were having at the start around kind of time. And it's like, because we have finite time, we have to be conscious about where we direct that time. And I think that that is where we start questioning, okay, what subjects actually bring value to my life? What subjects do they kind of fuel that fire of passion inside of me? And that's where I think what's just so cool about Bitcoin is it just gives us more capacity to dive into these subjects, given that we don't have the same financial stress the longer you're in Bitcoin. You just have more capacity to show up more authentically. And that, to me, I just think is incredible. And I think overall, what I just love about Bitcoin is because we have more capacity and we're curious, many times we kind of very much abide by the idea of strong opinions loosely held. So we're willing to debate something. We're willing to have conversations about something. However, when new information surfaces that maybe conflicts with our beliefs, we can look at it objectively, or as close to objectively as possible, and then redraw our maps. And so because we've already torn up, as I mentioned, one of the hardest maps to tear up, the map of money, we're in a much better position to start tearing up more maps around us, the maps of science, the maps of relationships, the maps of food, the maps of education, and ask ourselves, like, actually, what does the map look like that actually more accurately tracks reality and maybe leads to a more fulfilling life? And I think that you see it a lot in, say, the map of relationships. I think a lot of us, our map of relationships is just seeing how our parents interacted. But then sometimes our parents aren't necessarily happy. Maybe they fight here and there. Maybe they're just existing with one another. And it doesn't feel like there's like a deep, deep, deep bond, deep connection on like a romantic level. It just feels like two best friends. And so it's like, well, you know what? If I want to have a different relationship to that, I can redraw that map, but I have to be curious. But I have to question the world around me. But I have to go and dig into other information that helps me redraw that map. Read books on relationships, read books on psychology, how we show up as individuals. And so any of us have the power to redraw these maps. It is time intensive, and it can be destabilizing, especially when you have these beliefs around the world, which you think it works in a certain way, and then you find out it doesn't, as kind of to the point you were making earlier.
Yeah, and I think money, because also people say like, oh, like I cannot look in all of those topics. And as you said, like it's true, like you have to value the time. And I think money, where you store your financial energy, where you store your life's energy, is a question that every person should study. It's like a natural thing where you should actually pay attention to. And so it's interesting how few people actually do that, how few people actually question. Like if you go out on the street and ask like 1,000 people, what is money? You will probably get like 959 very disappointing answers, like very superficial, like very, okay, they've never been asked a question and they've never really thought about that question even. Not even like, no, I'm not even talking about they are holding a different opinion of mine. They just never really thought about that question before. That's the sad part. Like if someone dives deep and really understands this stuff, I truly think they end up in Bitcoin. But let's say they don't end up at Bitcoin and they end up at some different solution. I respect that they did the homework. I respect that they at least, asked themselves questions about like, what is money? What is a great solution? But most people that I've seen, at least, they don't even question those things and they don't want to even go deeper. They just like, oh yeah, I have my euros. Like that's fine with me. Like that's my money. Government says so. It's accepted at my local stores. I can pay everything. I have my bank account is in euros. So I guess this is money now. And I'm like, no, what are you doing? And so,
like, I wonder, as you're saying that, what comes to mind is like, if you ever read the book, The Psychology of Totalitarianism, and this book was written by, I've completely blanked on the guy's name, but he's a professor of psychology at like Ghent University in Belgium. And what he mentions is that in society, there kind of tends to be like three kind of like groups. You've kind of got the mass majority, around 60% of the individuals, they just want to live life. They don't really have a strong opinion either way, pro-government, against government, Bitcoin, Fiat. They're kind of like, I just want to live life. You're then going to have around 20% of the population that tends to be very pro-government. We just want big government. We just need more regulation. Govern me harder, daddy. That's effectively just the world we live in. And then you've got kind of the remaining, whatever that is, useless at math, 15, 20% or so, that this individual tends to be questioning the world around them and redrawing these maps, being curious, asking themselves the question, does this belief actually map reality? Is this belief serving me? And I think that it's not necessarily that all of us at all times have to be redrawing our maps, but I think that it is when you've got a small portion of the population, that's 15, 20%, that is curious about the world, many times they end up redrawing the maps for society. And so we have a lot of these maps that pass down on us, like the map of money, as we've talked about. And so a lot of us just take it for granted that this is just money. But there's a small group of individuals, Bitcoiners, that are questioning that map, tearing up that map. They're the first ones to experience this new map that actually maps reality more accurately, where prices fall and life gets easier. But in time, hopefully that redrawing in their life will start to transcend them and start to redraw the map that humanity is using. And so as long as you've always got this small portion of individuals, I think that they're going to be redrawing maps for everyone else. It's almost like science advances on the fringe. There's always going to be individuals that are curious about the world around us, and they're the ones that are pushing science forward. It's never science advancing in the main institutions and the main bodies and the main corporations, because they kind of want to stick with the status quo because they're making money off the status quo. They benefit from the status quo. So it's always kind of that small group of individuals that create change, question the maps they're using, and try to redraw those maps.
That's so fascinating. The time flies by with you, I have to say. I think we should sit down once for like 5 hours. It's like release it in parts. But it's been really, really interesting. As you might know from last time, I asked one question to every single, of my returning guests. And the question is, what have you learned outside of Bitcoin since your last appearance? I mean, we have talked now a lot about like outside of Bitcoin stuff. Maybe you still have something else to share here.
I would say, you know what, I've gone deep down the rabbit hole of light and just the importance of light. And I'm sure there's a lot of Bitcoiners that have gone down this rabbit hole as well, but I've just found it really, really fascinating just how important light is. And so like, I live in Squamish, which is about 30 minutes south of Whistler, the ski resort. It's about 45 minutes north of Vancouver. And I think there's a beer company called the 49th Parallel. So I'm going to assume that we're on the 49th Parallel from like a latitude, longitude perspective. And during the winter months, sunlight feels like it's very low in the sky. You're not getting sunburned. And I notice an impact on my mental health. And so this summer, I was very conscious about spending a lot of time outside. The first thing I do when I wake up before I turn on any lights is get outside, ground, no shoes, get in the grass, go and ground, do some breath work, get in natural light, let that light kind of like filter into the body, and just understanding like the importance of natural light. And I think what a lot of people don't necessarily recognize is like the first thing you do if you wake up and you look at your phone screen and you turn on your light and your light is a standard LED light, you're getting punched with blue light. Well, blue light is very different from red light, which is the natural light that you get from the sun when it is low in the sky early in the morning. And blue light tends to be predominantly in midday when the sun is in the middle of the sky. So what it tells your body when you're looking at your phone and when you're looking at the light next to your bed, what it tells you is that, hey, you're getting a lot of blue light. It's the middle of the day, you need to be awake. So it punches you with cortisol, epinephrine, adrenaline, a lot of these stress hormones to wake you up. But then you end up crashing into the middle of the day. And so getting a good light habit is really important. So try not to look at your phone, try not to look at artificial light the first thing you wake up. Try and get outside, get natural light, because your body getting red light in, it tells your body, hey, it's the start of the day. We're going to start waking up naturally. We're going to release certain hormones in order to kind of energize and get your day started. And then when you start getting natural blue light from the sun in the middle of the sky in the middle of the day, that's when you start to get a little bit of a boost through cortisol and whatnot to be able to come and help push you through to the end of the day. But being in alignment with natural light rhythms and getting away from artificial lights, maybe moving towards incandescent lights, the original Edison bulbs, like things like that, I've noticed a huge, huge difference on my mental health.
I recently had Ahmad Amouz, the brother of Seyr on my podcast. He's an actual med doctor. we went through so many topics on the podcast of like different health things. And then at the end of the podcast, I asked him the question, what is the most important thing that people are most likely doing wrong that they should fix? And he said light. Most Bitcoiners know about diet, know about exercising, all of that. But light is often overlooked, and how important your light management is and what you're doing with your light is so, so important. It influences, like having all that blue light in the end of the day before you go to sleep. You're like, you have your phone like right here and then you're like, now I want to sleep. Like, of course you have a hard time getting to sleep if you like have your phone right here in front of your face right before you go to sleep and all those blue lights. It's actually, oh gosh, I had a live stream going on at like 8:15 p.m. my time, and Ahmad Amuz who came on and said all those things about light, and I changed my strategy around live stream because I first thought about the audience first, and I was like, okay, what is the perfect time to go live? And now I moved it to 5 p.m. my time because I noticed, I only realized it with Ahmad Amuz telling me, I noticed every day when I went live at 8:15 p.m. and went live to like 9:15, 9:30, sometimes 9:45 p.m., I had a very hard time sleeping because I have those like big LED lights in front of me and next to me. And it's like, oh shit. They are like, really hovering over me. And now I put my whole schedule, in a way that at latest at 7 p.m. I'm done with everything and I can slow down. Now 7 p.m. is the latest, like the earliest I can do because I'm in Europe and most of my people and my guests and stuff like that is in America. Otherwise, I would love to stop at like 3 p.m. or like 2 p.m. even. 3 p.m. probably is good. 4 p.m. is also probably good. But I just can't do it because then I have to say no to most of my guests, or they have to wake up very early for me, which I also don't want to do. But literally because of light, I changed my schedule. So I rarely now do an episode after 7 p.m. Now it's 6:21 p.m. It's like my last episode. So I want to make sure always that before 7 p.m. I'm done with having a huge, like this is literally like almost 1 square meters of light in front of me. And then there's like a half square meter next to me. Having that in the middle of the night. I was on BTC Sessions, live stream on a Friday, and he goes live on a time where it is in my time zone, like 1 a.m. in the morning. And so I was almost sleeping, and I actually slept before the live stream, and I put my alarm on for like midnight. So I'm awake at like 1 a.m. when the live stream starts, and I put the lights on and I was like, oh, almost like someone shot me in the face. This was really, really interesting because afterwards, I just couldn't sleep anymore. Mm-hmm. Like that night, I didn't sleep, like, because I had that light, and then it was like 2:30, maybe 3 in the morning, something like that, when I went off the live stream, went off the group chat. And I was like, oh, I'm so awake. I was so pumped. I was full of adrenaline. I was like, I should be really, really sleepy now, but I just stayed up and worked. And then it was like 5 in the morning. But then at 11 a.m., 12, all of a sudden I'm like, poof, no energy. So I just want to reiterate what you basically said. Light is so important and most people don't pay attention to it.
Oh man, absolutely. And it's interesting you say that, because I think that there are two components as well. Like one, you're getting blasted with blue light when you're about to go to sleep. So it's telling your body it's the middle of the day, you need to stay awake. We're going to punch you with serotonin or cortisol, epinephrine, adrenaline. But two, I think the other aspect is when you're talking to like-minded individuals and you're having these amazing conversations, I always walk away just feeling like totally buzzed. So even if I was like in natural light, didn't have any blue light, I would also just struggle sleeping anyway. I was just down in Montana, when was it? Maybe like 8 weeks ago, and there was 37 Bitcoiners, and we rented this place. We just hung out in the mountains and just spent time together, just like intentional time together. It wasn't a conference. And I would just be, every single time when I went to bed at like, 1 o'clock in the morning, it just felt like you're vibrating on a cellular level. And we hadn't been in that unnatural light. We'd been in natural light, we'd been out all day, but it was just because you're just energized from being around like-minded individuals where you're just having phenomenal conversation. And the final point that I'll just quickly make is when you were talking about light being the number one, this guy mentioned, it's kind of like the number one factor. There's an interesting conversation. And I know a lot of people aren't a big fan of Jack Kruse, just because sometimes the way that he kind of communicates, but there's a lot of value in the stuff that he talks about. And one of the points he made that really stood out to me is he says, when Usain Bolt kind of set the 100-meter sprinting record, supposedly he was like eating chicken McNuggets, like he was eating McDonald's when he set this record. And at the time where he was living on a volcano. So he was getting a ton of natural light. There's a lot of energy naturally in those type of environments. And that is what fueled him. He's just like, light is the number one. Like if you would have one change, it's like get a good natural light like setup, and it's like get into a good rhythm, get into a good frequency when you wake up, get into natural light. And there was a study that I came across a little while back that really opened my eyes. And one of the things it mentioned is that since 2000 to present day, the what was it? It was the average 20-year-old today has the testosterone that a 70-year-old had in 2000. To me, I'm just like, that is mind-blowing. The average 20-year-old today has the same testosterone that a 70-year-old had in 2000. And I would argue that one of the main impacts of that is light. Kids are not getting good quality light. They're in front of blue light all day. They're sitting in front of their phone when they're laying in bed. And the problem with this is that as kids, their testosterone is falling off a cliff. Well, testosterone is involved in prosocial behavior. So as our testosterone drops, prosocial behavior is essentially conformity. As our testosterone drops, we conform. We don't stand up for what we believe in. We don't stand up for what is right. And so I think that I would argue that we can fall into more totalitarian, more controlling, more authoritarian environments when our testosterone is falling off a cliff, because we conform, because we're not willing to stand up for who we are. We're not willing to stand up for what we believe in. And you see it when you see people that are healthy, when they're fit, when they feel, whether it's a man feeling in their masculine energy, when it's a female in their feminine energy, they're willing to like stay true to their authentic self. And so that I find really, really interesting. And that this testosterone statistic isn't just for men, it's for both women as well. When testosterone falls, it impacts our ability to show up and not necessarily conform. And one of the things it talks about is how getting out in natural light is so unbelievably important. If you even just get out for 20 minutes, take your t-shirt off and get like irradiate the chest, it will increase testosterone 120%. And I think this is where some people have heard about like sun your balls. Like this whole idea is like, if you get out into natural sun, lay down naked, it will increase within 20 minutes testosterone 200% in some of these studies. And you're just like, that is mind-blowing. And so we're just sitting inside, we're getting blue light, which is getting cooked from artificial light. We're not getting natural light. So it's like, get outside. And this summer, I made a very definitive point of getting outside every single day, walking down the river with my dog, jumping in the river, and then laying out and drying naturally in the sun. And I noticed my mental health improved significantly. And so it's like, I highly, highly, highly recommend natural light.
I mean, how can you have a bad day if you jumped in a river with a dog and tried in the sun? I mean, like if you start your day like that, like it's very hard to have a bad day. Like honestly,
Totally.
That sounds amazing. And also I'm not a camper, but every time I do, which is very, very rare, I see my sleep improving because my schedule all of a sudden aligns with the natural aligned with the sun. So the sun wakes up at like in the summers, maybe 5, 6 a.m. In the winters, maybe 7, 8 a.m. Depends on like where you live and like when the sun goes up and what time of the year it is. But it is fascinating to wake up with the sun and you get that amazing feeling. And it's like 5, 6 in the morning and you're like, I'm wide awake. I'm ready for the day. And it's just really, really cool. And if you are inside and the first thing is like blue lights, alarm clock, and like you open the curtains, like it's a horrible feeling. And so the closer, and I tried that, and I'm curious what you think actually about that. I tried that, for a short amount of time because it's like just really hard, but I tried to align my sleeping schedule naturally with the sun. So I tried to stand up with the sun. I
couldn't like do it because then you stand up in the summer at like 4 a.m. and in the winter at like 8 a.m. So it's like very unnatural to change the wake up time constantly. But I actually kind of liked it because you always go outside and all of a sudden there's sun. You always wake up with the sun, and you always have that habit also with going outside and seeing the sun. I don't know if you've read anything with like aligning your sleep schedule with when the sun wakes up.
I was actually just down in Kauai, like one of the Hawaiian islands. When was this? Maybe like 4 weeks ago. And oh my God, like as people know, like the closer to the equator you are, the less of a like difference in sunset time there is through winter through summer. And so at the equator, it's just 6 a.m., 6 p.m. every single day, doesn't change. And so it's really easy to get into that schedule. And even just in this week while I was in Kauai, oh my God, it was incredible. Being able to just wake up at around 5 a.m. when the sun was rising, get outside into natural warm weather. You're not really wearing a t-shirt because you're not cold. It's just like a nice kind of humid, warm temperature. And then in the evenings, the sun would go down at 6 p.m. and we'd be in bed by 7 p.m. And I think that when we look back throughout history, we're in a really unique time because only in the last, 150 years since we've had electricity, have we been able to really stay up past the sun setting. I think most of us, prior to electricity, we would have woken up when the sun rise and go to bed just after the sun sets. We'd have a little fire, would maybe get into community, would contemplate a lot more, would think about the world around us, would think about these big questions. We wouldn't have technology to distract us. We wouldn't have, like, there was no such thing as artificial light. And so today we're at a time where we're throwing off all of our hormones. We're throwing off basically how we show up. We're completely throwing off our sleep schedules because we don't have to abide by the natural laws of the universe, the rising of the sun and the falling of the sun. Like I think it's really interesting.
I have so many more thoughts on that, but I think we've covered it nicely. It's been a real pleasure talking with you. We have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest asks you a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And as you know, the previous guest asked you the question, why did you really buy Bitcoin when you first actually did?
You know what? And maybe this is a bit of a bland answer. I would say that at the time, I was looking for an asset that hopefully could just protect my portfolio because I was like, oh my God, this life is getting harder and harder and harder. And I was looking for an asset that hopefully would go up quicker than other assets, that was the fastest racehorse, so that hopefully I was able to try and get ahead, be able to buy my own principal residence and such. And then the secondary point to that is the reason why I started even looking at Bitcoin was because I had bought a property. Real estate was my thing before Bitcoin. And I'd bought a property in 2014. And in the following years, the property market had just surged. And then we were coming into the pandemic. And it was, at the time, the pandemic hadn't actually hit. It was December of 2019. We were approaching the pandemic. I didn't know the pandemic was going to hit. And just like most people. And I decided, I was just like, you know what? The economy feels very unstable. The economy feels like it just doesn't, it can't sustain this. House prices have freaking tripled. There's no way that house prices over the last 10 years are tripling can continue again for the next 10 years. And so I ended up selling a property in December of 2019. And then the pandemic ended up hitting. And I ended up being like, you know what? I've just timed the market. This is perfect. Housing prices are going to drop 50%. I'm going to buy back in. And instead, the government injected trillions of dollars into the economy and house prices skyrocketed. And although I'd been in Bitcoin really to float the portfolio and try to kind of invest in it purely from like an asset perspective, it was at that moment that I really understood just how broken the system was. Like I believed we were in a free market capitalist environment, and this really opened my eyes to recognizing that we're not. Like you think the market's going to do one thing and it does the other because the central bank steps in, because the central bank tinkers with interest rates, because the central bank increases money supply. And so for me, it was a couple of different factors, but basically Bitcoin was the fastest racehorse. And and then when I quit my job, dedicated all my time and energy to Bitcoin in June of 2020, that's when I really started to grok just how important Bitcoin was from a societal, spiritual perspective. And it's profoundly, profoundly changed my life.
I love that.
the fastest racehorse in the thing, and then you're like, oh, okay. Then you dive deeper and you get what other things kind of Bitcoin lead you towards. Really, really cool. Really cool to have you back on. Like, this was really a pleasure talking with you, as it always is. Before I let you go, where can people find you and ask you questions?
I would say, like, feel free to, like, you can find me on Twitter. I still say Twitter. I like the word Twitter. I can't get into X. And so you can find me on Twitter, and it's just Seb Bunney, and Bunney is Bunney. You can also find me just on my own personal little website, which is just sebbunny.com. And some of these little topics, actually, we didn't really discuss it much at all. I wrote a book called The Hidden Cost of Money, and another one called Beers for Bitcoin. And I love diving into just the impact of money on society and how Bitcoin, I think, can reshape the world in which we live in. But again, like, I really appreciate kind of the work you do in this space, Robin. I think you're definitely like a voice of signal, and we're so lucky to just have you on side. And I'm looking forward to the next time we're able to chat.
Thank you so much. You're so nice. It's too kind. And I also think it will be fun to see when like, there will be a time in place where I tell someone, you can find me on Twitter, and he's like, oh, what is Twitter? And I mean, like, X. Oh, okay, I'm also on X. And then I realize how old I am. Like, there will be a time where these things happen. But right now I'm also still in team. I call it Twitter, because for me, this is the platform I grew up on, and it's like really hard to let go of that name. And I also think X is just a weird name. It's you remember the memes that came out when you saw on the credit card, like the X Premium, and like it sounded like a porn site that you subscribed to.
Absolutely. And for the longest time, because I'm trying to remember, what was it, maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago? I've completely lost track of time because the time distortion of Bitcoin. But I don't remember when we transitioned across to X. But I would say I kept the Twitter app. I didn't update it to X for almost a year before it basically was being, what is the word, deprecated? Like, they basically was saying we're no longer supporting that version. And I was so bummed, because I just, like, for at least a year, I was able to keep the little Twitter app, and I preferred the Twitter app. I like the little bird.
It was on July 23, 2023. Also, like on the 23rd July 2023. So now 2 years and like some months old. So like we are already in the third year of X, and we're still calling it Twitter. So I guess we are the boomers.
Back when we were younger.
Crazy. Thank you so much, Seb, for being on. And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.